96% of Venezuelan population live in poverty with an income of less than $5 a month.
Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to the new edition of the Forum 2000 online chat. Today we are joined by María Corina Machado, an opposition leader from Venezuela and the leader of the political party Vente Venezuela. She was also a member of the Congress and a presidential candidate in the 2012. Hi, welcome, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, ma'am. It's a pleasure for me.
Thank you. You were also supposed to join us at the Forum 2000 conference, which took place just recently. And unfortunately, this was not possible due to the power cuts and problems with internet connection in Venezuela, which happened across the country. So first, I just wanted to touch upon this issue. If you can explain and describe a little how is the current situation in Venezuela and what are the biggest challenges that citizens have to face these days?
Yeah, in fact, I wasn't able to join you because that day there was an energy blackout that affected 17 out of 24 states. So there was no energy, there was no way to have connection. And that's turned to be the common and frequent situation throughout Venezuela. Imagine a country that has the highest oil reserves in the world today has no gas, no energy. People have to cook with wood in over 50 of Venezuelan households. 96% of Venezuelan population live in poverty with an income of less than $5 a month. So that's why you have the biggest migration in Latin American history. Not only 6 million, more or less, Venezuelans that have already fled, but we are fearing that in the months to come, we will see a huge wave of Venezuelans trying to simply save their lives, because staying in Venezuela means dying of hunger, of lack of basic services, and of course of violence. Violence mostly produced by the regime that has turned Venezuelan territory in a territory occupied by criminal groups from several places of the world and characteristics.
Yes, and there have been a number of protests across the country. So in these conditions, how can the citizens mobilize and the activist movements mobilize also in the middle of the pandemic and the lockdown?
Well, people are walking. It's simply desperate. When you see the migrants leaving, they actually walk for days in Venezuela, and then where else they go. In Venezuela, as I said, the economy has, calmed down and locked down much before the pandemic, because the regime has put in place controls, has taken over many enterprises and farms throughout the country for years. So a country that was once vibrant and a source of opportunities for millions that came from all over the world today has turned into a catastrophe, both on a human side, because of lack of income and work, etc., and also in the human rights side. And I think it's very important to insist in what happened on September 16, in the report that was made public by an independent mission, a task force, fact-checking from the UN that worked for a year, and its conclusions actually accused Nicolás Maduro of being a criminal of human atrocities. So this is it's a turning point or a critical point, because it proves what we've said during many years about the nature of the regime that's in place in Venezuela right now.
Yes, and now I'd like to ask you about the parliamentary elections that are scheduled for December 6th. And the opposition and the international community agreed that there are no conditions for any fair and free elections to take place in the country. And the opposition, I think, is boycotting the elections, and they have agreed on on a popular consultation to take place. So I wanted to ask you your opinion about this, like what can we expect from this popular consultation and what is its purpose?
Look, I think it's important to use the correct terms when we're facing a tragedy such as the one we're living in Venezuela. I mean, the thing that the regime is calling for are not elections. In order to have an election, you have to have sovereignty, national sovereignty. Today, Venezuelan territory, over 70%, has been taken over by criminal groups, from the guerrilla, Colombian guerrilla, the drug cartels, and terrorist organizations such as Hezbollah and Hamas, both operating in Venezuelan territory. Also, there are criminal groups that dedicate themselves to smuggling not only minerals and gas, but also people and child prostitution. This is something that is grotesque and that is increasing by the hour. These groups have not only the control of the territory, but they also exercise social control. So there's no possibility for a citizen in Venezuela to go and express freely its decision, its will in terms of what will and where will go the country. Over 90% of Venezuela population is against, but fiercely against this regime. But we know that they will not give power through a sham election or a weak dialogue. We've had 29 elections and 15 referendums in the last 20 years. And the regime has used this clearly democratic mechanism to try to create a democratic facade to hide a criminal organization, a criminal conglomerate that is using Venezuela as a safe haven to expand its activities to other countries in our region. So the critical moment we're living is that it's not only the future of a nation, in this case Venezuela, what's at stake right now. What we're seeing is that from Venezuela, using Venezuela resources and part of the regime, there is in process a destabilization of Colombia, Ecuador, Chile, and Bolivia, and so on. So the world has to understand that this is a criminal conglomerate, that it's working against the Western values and liberal democracies, and it's doing with the resources, the criminal resources they get from drug trafficking and other criminal industries.
So basically the popular consultation or any plebiscite referendum wouldn't have much sense in this context.
To be honest, there are opinions about this consultation. I believe that we already did that as a nation in 2017. Over almost 8 million Venezuelans throughout the world expressed our opinion and gave a mandate. And I believe that mandate, it's alive, it's firm, it's clear, and we as public, as leaders of different sectors and organizations, we ought to follow that mandate. Is it dangerous? Very much, certainly, very much. Because the regime is putting all its repression force to break down our will to fight, and they found some, let's say, sectors or individuals that are willing to simply collaborate and try to find a situation in which the regime can stay in power and allow these actors to stay as well. And this is simply not admittable for us, because our fight is not to look for better conditions for certain opposition sectors. Our fight is for freedom, and we will not accept less than that.
And what do you think that should be any unified strategy of the Venezuelan opposition in the context of the upcoming elections? And maybe how can be Nicolás Maduro overthrown in this context in case there are no conditions for any fair elections, democratic elections in the country?
Well, as I said before, this goes much beyond conditions. I mean, we're talking about a nation that's in process of dissolution. And this has never been seen in the Western Hemisphere before. So what we're talking is we need to stop this tragedy. We need to stop this dying and suffering that is increasing as we speak, and that is a really strong and evident threat to the national security of every single nation in this hemisphere. This is not only now a case of solidarity with Venezuelans or respect of human rights. This is the biggest threat, danger, that is clear and present to the national security of these nations, because it is obvious now, as we warned for a long time, that Iranian military, Russian military are as well installed in Venezuela and are part of the support the criminal regime is getting at this point. So what is up to do? We need to create the force, with forces from within and without, to demonstrate to these criminals that simply the West world won't let Venezuela go and destroy. So this has to be a credible threat that makes the regime understand that it's in their own interest to accept terms of negotiation for them to go. But you have to do it from a position of strength, not weakness. So there are important things that are being taking place right now. We need to understand this is an unconventional war, an unconventional conflict. It is. And in order to win it, you have to take important actions in several layers, in the international justice, political justice, in the markets, so such as actions such as the sanctions, economic sanctions against the criminals, and certainly to undermine the possibility of the regime to keep on getting illegal resources. That's why these anti-narcotics operations that's taking place in the Caribbean has been very effective and needs to escalate.
So also the support from the international community and the action of the international community would be an important part of the solution, maybe.
But absolutely. I mean, the regime has from backing them, not only, the drug trafficking organization and terrorist organizations, they have obviously other regimes such as Russia, Syria, Turkey, China, and Iran supporting them. So what's the alternative? To leave us Venezuelans that have an occupied territory, a failed state in place to fight alone? So we are willing to do what we ought to do. And we have proved that for over 20 years. We're fighting for us, and we're fighting also for democracy in our neighboring countries. But we certainly need the international democratic regimes and governments to support us. And important things have been done. And we've seen actions also from the European community. But to be honest, I've seen positions that look very naive. And the tragedy that's taking place in Venezuela gives no place for indifference, ignorance, or naivety anymore.
Are there any specific steps that you think should be taken immediately in order to, increase the support from the international community or the impact they have in the country?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, there are other sources of black and illegal financing that the regime gets from, illegal trafficking of gold and other minerals from Venezuela. Many countries, look the other way around and facilitate these transactions to take place. This has to be cut. There are criminals and part of the corrupt structure of the regime that live in Europe and that have the huge funds in European banks. These ought to be told and stopped. We think that there are sanctions that should be put in place to individuals that have made huge resources with and funding with the regime. But the problem is that corrupt liaisons have been discovered with members of certain governments of Europe as well, such as Spain. So you see that there are incentives to maintain the status quo, even though that means losing thousands of lives every day we go and we stay in this situation. I mean, here in Venezuela, the Maduro stay in power, we not count it in hours or minutes anymore. We count it in deaths, in lives we lose, in families that tear apart, in people that live desperate. So we ought to stop this, because this is a human tragedy. This is a catastrophe that can be, as I say, stopped, but also that ought to be rebuilt as a nation. And I believe we can do that relatively fast, because there is the will, the knowledge, and the commitment in Venezuelan society. It's Venezuela. It's not a polarized society. On the contrary, Venezuela is a very cohesion society that desires to rebuild our institutions and our families, to bring our families back and to turn our country once again in a source of support for democratic values, for justice, and for well-being for the whole Western community.
Thank you very much for joining us and for explaining us more what is happening in Venezuela now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We count on you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.